So my name is Alex Knecht. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Bali Seafood and North Atlantic. We spent the past 10 years developing the first commercially sponsored sustainable fishery in Asia. To underline my talk today, to guide us, I want to use three images. The first is the sifting pan. The second, a carrot. And third, a coin. Sifting pan, carrot, coin. For those of you less familiar with old school mining technology, sifting pan is what we use to separate dirt and mud from gold and ore. And this is an excellent metaphor for how difficult it is to uncover what someone really wants, self-interest. It'd be amazing if when we walk down the street, the people that come at us, they have badges on their forehead that says, I feel like a cheeseburger for lunch, or I need a new girlfriend. But in reality, that's not the case. Imagine if we were trying to sell something and a sales prospect was sitting across the table from us, and they had a thought bubble above their head and said, I won't pay more than $12,000 for this. For those salespeople in the room, I bet you could make that sale. In reality, self-interest is hard to uncover. We have to ask questions, engage in conversation. We have to understand social constructs. We have to understand different relationships and some sociology to triangulate what people actually want. Just like with panning for gold, we have to continue trying hypotheses and shaking them out to find those golden nuggets of truth. Let's look at this and a specific example from my life. So we work in fisheries in Indonesia. And Indonesia, unlike Singapore, has a specific reputation for public service. Some people might say that politicians or bureaucrats in Indonesia can be corrupt sometimes, seeking bribes, graft. Now, Indonesia is not unique in this situation. Almost all countries face this problem. In fact, my birth country, the United States, we have a bunch of issues with this. You've probably heard about it in the news recently. But I do a lot of work with the Ministry of Fisheries in Indonesia. A couple of years ago, we needed to get in front of a very important person in the ministry to ask for to generate some regulation. And I couldn't get in front of this gentleman. The only access point I had was with a junior bureaucrat, we'll call Agus. Now, when I approached Agus to ask for the meeting, he asked for a consultant fee of $2,000. Now, frankly, I didn't have the money to spend on the meeting. But even if I did, I wasn't sure that if I paid it, I would get the meeting. And second, if I got the meeting, I wasn't sure that I was going to get what I needed. So it wasn't really an option. I asked Agus if he would negotiate. I asked him if he had some other things that he might find of value that I could provide. I asked my friends if they could call in a favor and set the meeting for me. I asked friends that knew Agus if they could call in a favor. Nothing worked. We were stuck for 6 months. Let's put a pin in Agus. We'll come back to him in a minute. What did we need? From Agus, we needed to talk to his boss about establishing the framework for regulation around co-ops for small-scale fisheries in Indonesia. Now, to understand what I'm talking about, I need to give you a little background about my business. So traditionally, seafood in Indonesia is processed in the infrastructure centers, mostly in Java, Surabaya, and Jakarta. Typically, fish from the eastern archipelago, which is the fertile fishery where all the fish live in Indonesia, move across the land bridge back to Jakarta or Surabaya. In the case of Sumbawa, where our factory is, this process takes 5 to 7 days. In this process, the fish oftentimes is subject to heat, low ice, diesel fumes, any number of things. We've commissioned 2 independent studies that have demonstrated that between 40 and 60% of the value of the fish is lost in this process. So our strategy has been, instead of moving the fish back to the infrastructure centers, we take the processing and move it to Sumbawa. Now this concept is a pretty good business practice, right? You take the 40, 60%, and that's your profit increase. But what's interesting and more important is that if we use the traditional model for fisheries and processing, in 5 years, there'll be no more fish in Sumbawa. And we come by this honestly. Our business was started 30 years ago by my father in the northeast of the United States. the time he had 5 fishing boats and a small factory there. For the first 15 years, business was fantastic. And then, slowly, piece by piece, the fishery started to decrease. In the mid-90s, the US government stepped in and shut it down completely. And he was forced to go other places, first starting in Central America, then South America, looking for other fish. The same thing happened there. The stock started to collapse, the government stepped in, looking for new options. Until we came to Asia. And by that time, we kind of decided, you know, I think we're not doing something right. There's got to be a better way to do this. And with the help of some other smart people, we came up with this idea of the commercially sponsored sustainability model. Typically, in Western countries, governments create institutions that support fisheries management to create sustainability. But in developing countries like Indonesia, like in Sumbawa, the top-down model doesn't work. What we talk about is enabling from the bottom up. We call it a community-based fisheries model. So we work with the local villagers and the local fishermen and organize them to try and drive progress. So, in order to understand the self-interest of fishermen in Sumbawa, let's look at one particular example. This gentleman, we'll call him Junaidi. Junaidi is from a small village in northwest Sumbawa called Dampu. Junaidi has a wife and 2 daughters. He inherited his boat from his father. Junaidi fishes 20 days a month, 7 months a year. The rest of the time when it rains, he tends a small corn crop by his house. Junaidi never finished middle school. In fact, he's illiterate. And all he wants is for his children to have a better life than he had. Junaidi has a wife. She's been having stomach problems. She's not really sure what's going on. His kids are still in middle school, but he knows that when they get to high school, which is 45 minutes away, he needs his motorbike to take his fish to the market instead of taking his kids to school. He's not sure what he's going to do. Some days, Junaidi can buy chicken and goat for his family to eat for dinner, and sometimes it seems like there's not even enough for rice left over. Junaidi is one of 800 fishermen that we work with in Sumbawa. Now, we talked a little bit about the community and co-op organization of our fisheries fleets. But what's important is we need Junaidi to do things differently if we're going to harvest fish sustainably in Sumbawa. We need him to use ice on his catch so we lock in the quality of the fish. We need him to only catch big fish and let the little fish go. We need him to throw back fish that have eggs that are going to have new fish. And we need him to not fish certain seasons when the fish are reproducing. All of these things pull money out of Junaidi's pockets if nothing else is done. But what we do is we take that 60% value loss in this cold chain by moving our factory to Sumbawa, and we reinvest it, partially in paying Junaidi more money for the big fish. Yeah, we pay him less money for the small fish, but he can make more money on the big ones. But that's not enough. What we have to do is talk to Junaidi's wife and his family and his community, understand what they need. Right? Maybe we can provide tablets at discounted or free prices for his wife's stomach infection. Maybe we can provide him enough access to small loans that he can buy a motorbike and his kids can go to high school. So these are the kinds of incentives that we think about when we address self-interest. We think about what he truly needs and try and match the incentives with those needs. So in this process, what we do is we don't just address Junaidi, we address the social circles around him. Because if we provide an incentive for Junaidi alone, he may change his behavior. But what's way more effective is if we address his family and build trust with his community, and then his wife is asking him and suggesting that he follow what we're suggesting that he do to be more sustainable. And his community is engaged and supported and enriched by him using more sustainable efforts. And all of this pressure together creates change. So we go back to our friend Agus, the bureaucrat. Now, we did the same thing. We asked him what was important to him. We tried to triangulate through his social network what he might be interested in. It turns out Agus is worried about his pension. He's in his late 50s. His wife has an expensive shopping habit. His son just dropped out of university. He's worried about how he's going to maintain his lifestyle on a pension. That's what he was asking the money for. So we had a different idea. We said, you know what? Maybe we can use notoriety to change his behavior. So what we did, we went to all the newsrooms, we went to the newspapers, we talked to the other officials. All we did for 6 months was talk about how great a goose was. How without his help, we could never have been successful in Sumbawa. And in fact, without his guidance, we wouldn't have even invested money in Sumbawa. Soon he was noticed by not only his boss, but his boss's boss. A goose was in line for a promotion. His promotion would be in a bigger pension, and he was happier than he'd ever been. In fact, we had no problem scheduling the meeting with a goose's boss. He presented our business as his idea to his boss. And we got our co-ops formed. And so the dream became a reality. And we were able to create this community that supports a fishery that creates long-term livelihood improvement for the whole community. So not just fish today, but fish tomorrow and fish 10 years from now. So when we think about aligning incentives, and we think about using our sifting pan to try and understand self-interest, so often incentives are used only with money. And yes, they work, and they're fairly, they address things like ability to make choices or improve security. But money's ubiquity is also its downfall, because it's not specific enough. In these two cases, we've talked about understanding deeply what is important to someone and addressing those things directly. And the power of that is way more impactful than just throwing money at a problem. In our case, incentives have to work for both the giver and the receiver. If we had given money that we didn't have, we would have opened ourselves up for more asks for more money. We could have even been extorted for not following the law. But we tried to identify ways that we could address specifically the self-interest, monetarily and non-monetarily, to get the people, the stakeholders in our business, to change their behavior to support a common goal. And by doing that, we created value. So I use the coin as an indicator of value. And so often we think of, Scrooge McDuck diving in his vault of gold coins, right? And this is oftentimes thought about as greed. I would argue that greed is good. I know that's a bit provocative, but greed is good. Let's go back to the beginning of our conversation. We talked about helping your children demonstrate good morals. Yeah, maybe if your kids have good character and they grow up to be successful, they can provide for you in your old age, and that's vaguely a financial incentive. But more importantly, if your kids have good morals and have good character, demonstrate moral fiber, they're probably going to be happy. And that makes you happy. And so your greed has improved the value of everyone's experience in your family. And I'd argue that maybe, if you think about it a little bit larger, you engage in the same behavior with your community. Maybe you donate time, or you give away old clothes for people that are less fortunate. You're thinking about how to solve and address the self-interest of others. You cast a wider net. So in our case, we engage with the community. We engage with the fishers. We engage with our employees. We asked, how can we address what you need so that we can also get what we need? And in the end, by addressing the self-interest of each of these people, we can create more value in aggregate than we can on the individual level. So individual greed often looks like extraction. It looks like exploiting someone else to get ahead yourself. But communal greed, casting a wide net, thinking about how everyone can benefit, that's the thing that has value. We're very proud of what we've done. We think it's a model that can change sustainable supply chains can work in fisheries. We're looking forward to replicating our model throughout Indonesia. But this has application in your lives as well. As you think about, how can I cast a wider net? How can I listen and understand self-interest? And how can I apply incentives to address that self-interest directly and create collective value? Thank you very much.